Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. As always, my co-host is here, Dr. Johanna Richey. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Jeff.
How have you been doing?
Oh, we're doing good. Got to play with the simulators finally, so that's been really exciting for the
Oh, you
students.
told me that.
Yeah.
Doug, we have ankle arthroscopy simulators right now, so that's a lot of fun at the school. So I am honored to introduce our distinguished guest today from California, Dr. Doug Richey. Welcome to Dean's Chat, Dr. Richey.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. And we won't mix up last names, so let's go with first names, Doug, Joe, and Jeff. How's that sound?
Great.
Doug, before we get started, I'd love to give you a little bit of a bio. If you give me a few minutes, I'll take maybe 30 seconds. How's that sound?
Great.
A brief bio.
All right. So Dr. Douglas Richey got his Doctor of Podiatric Medicine degree at the California College of Podiatric Medicine. He did his residency in reconstructive foot and ankle surgery at the Western Medical Center in Orange County, California. Dr. Richey established a private practice in Seal Beach, which has 2 locations and 3 full-time doctors. Dr. Richey's clinical and academic interests have focused really on biomechanics, sports medicine, and orthotic therapy. Dr. Richey has over 30 peer-reviewed articles, and he's also written several chapters. He also has written a textbook called Pathomechanics and Common Foot Disorders. Dr. Richey holds 4 U.S. patents on various designs of footwear and foot orthotics. In 1996, he designed and launched a new innovative foot ankle orthotic, which bears his name, the Richey brace. It's currently marketed in 6 countries and worldwide. He is a fellow in the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons. He's past president of the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine. He's an associate clinical professor at the California College of Podiatric Medicine at Samuel Merritt. Doug, we got a lot to talk about today.
Great. Let's do it.
All right. So the first thing I thought we'd talk about is your Richey brace. I've been a podiatrist for 30 years, and it seems like for my whole career, we've been writing prescriptions for Richey braces. We've seen it advertised. We've heard you talk about it. Can you talk a little bit about the Richey brace and it's how you formulated the idea over many years of having expertise in podiatric medicine? We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, it was a bit of serendipity. I had a practice that was really focused mostly on treating athletic injuries. And like most of us, I was challenged with treating chronic ankle instability. And at that time, the most popular ankle brace used for ankle sprains and instability was the Aircast brace, which was a stirrup type brace, still very popular. And my dilemma was making it fit in the shoe with an athlete that was already wearing custom foot orthoses, because the Aircast wouldn't fit all the way down into the shoe. In fact, it would often tear up the top cover, or even the plastic portion of the foot orthotic. And I often had to tell the athlete to take the orthotic out of the shoe to make room for the Aircast, because the brace at that point was more important than the foot orthotic. And for many years in my mind, I wanted to figure out a way to marry a foot orthotic to an ankle brace. And I did see a prototype of a non-custom off-the-shelf ankle brace that had a flat foot plate, of which there are many on the market today. But I saw one of these in the early 90s, and I took it to a foot orthotic lab that I was consulting with at that time. And I said, look, I think we can make this foot plate custom. And now we've got the perfect double limb upright control for the tibia and fibula, and we've got the foot control of a balanced foot orthosis. What do you think? And we started making prototypes and testing it, and lo and behold, it was working. And I didn't want to call it a Richey brace. I called it the FAST brace. I had this great name. It was called Foot and Ankle System Technology. And the lab I was working with at the time said, no, we had to call it the Richey brace. And I didn't really was comfortable with that, but I thought, this isn't probably going to really sell very much, and it's going to go away in a while. So you call it whatever you want. And that was in 1995, and we're coming up on now a 30-year anniversary. So it's been quite a journey.
Wow. As Joe had mentioned before the podcast, we haven't talked a lot about entrepreneurship on the podcast, and Joe, it might be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I love that's such a wonderful story. I love all the little behind the scenes stuff that we hear from all these different guests. Jeff, can you talk a little bit so again, it's wonder. I mean, we're literally just going through coding for our office right now, and of the AFOs of which we order, one of four was a Richie brace. So it's just, it's just probably not going to sell very much. It's just a small little thing that I'm kind of side project. And here you are now, 30 years later, with a, international marketed product. Can you talk a little bit about what that process, how that process really unfolded for you?
I became interested in blending entrepreneurship with podiatry while I was a student at CCPM. The dean at that time was Paul Scheer, who I think both of you knew. And I went to him and I said, I want to do a research project to improve my resume and my training for a residency. And he said, I've got a great idea for a research project. I have an antiperspirant that I developed for the foot that absolutely cures hyperhidrosis. And I just need somebody to do a clinical trial. And I said, boy, that's great. So I designed and we did a prospective, case-controlled clinical trial testing Paul's antiperspirant. And after we completed the trial, I had to go back to him and tell him the antiperspirant didn't really work. But I became an expert on sweating of the feet during my senior year at podiatry school. And I wrote a paper that got published in JAPMA, and I won the research award that year as a senior. So I was suddenly this expert. Lo and behold, I was contacted by a premium sock company, sports sock company called Thorlo. They're based in Statesville, North Carolina. And the owner of the company was very interested in developing socks that would reduce moisture content on the skin and reduce blistering on the feet. And so he hired me as a consultant. And that was one of many jobs I had right out of school, consulting in industry for products or things relative to foot health. And I loved doing it. It was exciting. I learned a lot about marketing, about testing products, about advertising. And from that, I got hired by a footwear company, and I got a patent on a shoe design that was quite successful in aerobic dance at that time. And then I was interested in orthotic materials, and I designed and performed a prospective study testing a new carbon graphite material for foot orthoses. And that's how I got hired by a podiatric lab. And from there, I did the Richie brace. So I had this long line behind me of product development and patents that really was an exciting sidelight to my private practice career. And I think it also made me a much better practitioner because I learned so much about footwear, hosiery, and foot health in a way different than what I was taught in school.
If I don't mind, I'd love to do a quick shout out to the late Dr. Paul Scheer. He was a professor of mine too, and he always had these incredible ideas. And Joe, when we were in biomechanics lab in March in San Francisco, we'd have a TV down there watching March Madness, and Paul Scheer would come down and help us make orthotics on the weekends for our students in the lab. And he was always full of good little anecdotes and great little stories. And he was one of our favorite professors for sure. So I think that's interesting that he kind of was the first domino in your entrepreneurial world. But I had a question for you specifically about the patent process. I've done a fair amount of patent work myself, and I found it to be fascinating because every time you go left or right, you seem to be overlapping someone else's patent or infringing on it. Did you have that experience, or what was your patent experience?
Well, it's totally different today because thanks to the internet, you can do much of the background search necessary. As you know, a lot of the cost of getting a patent is doing the patent search and making sure nobody else came up with the same idea, either embodied in that one particular patent or perhaps in several patents. And that's a very expensive process that a law firm usually undertook. But now, we have access to the the U.S. Patent Office and to their data bank, and you can do most of the background work, which is actually quite interesting to do. I think what amazed me with applying for and getting a patent was the fact that you really have to validate your invention. It's almost like writing a scientific paper with a review of literature, and patents are validated by sound thinking or science in many cases, that they go back and verify, and you'll lose your application if you make claims that are simply not true, which is kind of reassuring, in the whole world of industry and marketing and products, particularly in healthcare. So I found getting a patent to be a very exciting, educational experience, and a very rewarding experience. Again, it was a thing that I never had learned in school, but I learned it on the side, and I have great faith in our patent system in the United States as a result.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, it's the hallmark of innovation, right? Getting a U.S. patent. Just for our listeners, many times I would put in a provisional patent, which is like a placeholder, and once you get that number, they give you a year to improve upon it, so you can do more research, bench research, whatever, so you can improve the patent to increase your odds of getting it issued. But I commend you for that effort, because I know it's not easy, and it's the ultimate in delayed gratification.
Yes, it is delayed gratification.
No doubt about that.
What would you say between the two of your different experiences with this? What does that timeline kind of look like? So you submit a provisional patent. You have this idea, you submit for a provisional patent. What does that typically look like in terms of then execution on your product?
For me, it was either footwear, or a foot orthotic, or an AFO brace. And in every case, I got the patent in less than a year from day one. But I know with things, wound care products and surgical innovations and things like that, I think when it has bigger implications for potentially harming or helping people, I think the office is a little more, they scrutinize more. I mean, Jeff could probably verify that.
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't quite as fortunate in terms of time. My average patent is about 3 years between putting in my provisional patent and being issued a numerical patent. And it's interesting because over, what was it? It was maybe 23 years between my first patent and my last one. It went from patent number 6 million something to 11 million something. So it's, years ago, people thought, oh, there's nothing left to be invented. But oh my gosh, people are busy out there with innovation and creativity. Sure.
Yeah.
But the challenge I've had a couple times is some of my better ideas couldn't get patented because I was infringing on other patents in my, at the end of the day. And that's a challenge, because if you're not patented, you can't produce a product and market it the way it needs to be, because it'll get ripped off by somebody probably.
Yeah, it's amazing. You think you have this groundbreaking original idea, and then you look at all these inventions that never went to market, but they actually got a patent. I found a patent for a root functional foot orthotic when I was doing a patent search for my brace, and it was a podiatrist in the Bay Area, and I don't know how he was able to do this, but he was granted a U.S. patent on the concept that you could balance a forefoot varus or forefoot valgus deformity with a foot orthosis. And I sent this patent to Jeff Root, who's a good friend of mine. I said, are you aware of this? He said, I've never seen this or never knew. I mean, here was a podiatrist who took Merton Root's ideas and was able to patent it, even though it was being practiced routinely in the United States for 30 years prior.
That's so interesting.
That's fascinating.
And by the way, the podiatrist never did anything with the patent anyway. He didn't sell it to a lab, and he certainly didn't go out and enforce it and tell every lab in the US, hey, you're infringing on my patent. So thank goodness he didn't. It would have ruined our whole art form. Joe,
I have one interesting story about patents. So I have the TCC-EZ patent for diabetic foot ulcers, and it's done real well over the last 15 years. But we had a very important tipping point when it came to getting the patent, because the patent examiner said, you know, you're taking a cast, even though the cast forms to the foot, and then you're putting in a boot, and we don't think that's innovative. And my comment was, well, if it wasn't innovative, how come it's never been done before? And she said, well, you got a point there. Next thing you know, we had a patent. So I had to go to bat with my attorneys with the patent. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. You get challenged by them for sure. There's no application that goes in unchallenged.
Right. It's so fun. And then so Doug, when it came to the business and marketing it, was the lab doing it for you, and then you were kind of like the medical director on the side, or how does that work?
Yeah, you know, and that I think that's what I'm most proud of, is that once the brace started selling, a bunch of foot orthotic labs came to me and said, hey, we want to be able to sell that for you.
Oh.
Or they would say, we want to make it and just sell it. And I said, well, I have one lab who's making it, but if you want to market it and sell it as a finished product, but you have to buy it from my lab, I would be happy to have you do that. And these foot orthotic labs, who were all and still are very competitive with each other in the marketplace, were more than happy to share this one product, my brace, and market it to their own customers. And for 30 years, it's the only product ever been sold and shared by other foot orthotic labs together as a group effort ever. And
wow.
And I think that model was so unique, where I didn't sell it direct to doctors. I sold it to foot orthotic labs, who then sold it to their doctors. And even today, if you wanted to buy a Richie brace for your patient, if you're in private practice, you don't buy it from me, you buy it from XYZ custom foot orthotic lab. And we have 25 lab distributors in the United States.
That is a brilliant model. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, one comment before we move on. One of my best friends in podiatry is Brad Rutnick, and he speaks so highly of you. He said you've taught him so much over the years. And last time I talked to Brad, I said, I can't wait to get Dr. Richey on Dean's Chat. So I'm glad we're making it happen.
Oh, Brad was one of my favorite. As he probably told you, he was an associate of mine. He used to commute from San Diego to Seal Beach once a week, and it just wore on him. And he loved living in San Diego because he was sailing there. But definitely one of my favorite people ever in the profession. So thanks for sharing that.
No problem. So let's move on to Joe. Do you have any other questions on that, or can we? What do you want to?
No, we have so many fun things to talk about. So I'm good for moving on.
Okay, let's talk about academics for a minute. You know, the drive to write papers and books and chapters isn't something that just comes naturally, because you got to do it above and beyond the course of your usual day. Have you always been inquisitive? And I know you were a little bit in school, but where did that come from to the point where, you know, 30 plus publications, book chapters, a whole book? Obviously your passion is there, but what do you attribute that prolificness to?
Well, I'd say there are several reasons. The first paper I published was a investigation research with none other than Merton Root, which was a cadaver study measuring direction and range of motion of the first ray. And that paper, still today, it's been quoted in, I don't know, it's been cited at least 500 times in the podiatric and orthopedic literature. But the excitement of doing that study and seeing the recognition it got and the impact it made on the surgical community left a lasting impression and a desire to do more. The second thing was back to the entrepreneurial. I did a epidemiologic study my third year of private practice on aerobic dance injuries. And I'll be honest with you, the only reason I did the study was try to get referrals of patients to my office from all the aerobic dance studios in my area, because it was just taking off as this fad movement. And I thought, well, I want all these fitness centers to know that I am the expert on aerobic dance injuries. And I did that paper with Steve Kelso, a good friend and colleague of mine. And the attention we got from that and the recognition for it, because we were the first podiatrist to be published in a journal at that time, was the #1 sports medicine journal, Physician in Sports Medicine. And we were on Good Morning America and all kinds of TV shows. And I thought, this is pretty impressive that as a podiatrist, you study something as esoteric as this, but it has a big impact on the general population. And that's really rewarding, to realize that you can develop a knowledge and an expertise that, affects people's lives in a positive way outside of the surgical arena. So it was really the gratitude and the personal fulfillment of doing it that led me to continue doing that. And, I was just realizing this year, I finished clinical, I retired from clinical practice in 2019. And this year I published 3 papers, which I'm kind of astounded I was able to do that. But I published a paper with a group of orthopedic surgeons, coming up with a new classification system for adult acquired flat foot. And then I teamed with an Australian podiatrist to publish a 2-part paper in the Journal of Athletic Training on the pathomechanics and prevention of friction blisters, which has long been that goes back to my sweaty feet days in school.
Right.
But, I can't wait to do another paper. In fact, I'm doing one right now. I'm writing one on rotational deformity in hallux valgus. It's a weight-bearing CT study I'm doing with some guys at the Kent State University. So, yeah. And I wish all my colleagues had that zeal. That's one of my criticisms of the profession and my colleagues is I wish more people were doing original research. And, it seems to be going away more and more than even when I was in school.
Which is kind of why I was wondering what's the magic bullet. What do you think, Joe? Joe's one of the driving forces at the Arizona College for Research. So I'm sure you've got a thought on that.
Well, so we have a lot of amazing faculty doing a lot of research. I have a voice on a microphone today, so I get to stand and talk about it. But one of the challenges that I haven't figured out how to wrap my head around yet, and I would love your opinion on this. We touched on it a little bit with Tim Dutra and a little bit with Kevin Kirby as well. I feel like I hadn't thought how I wanted to say this out loud, but it will go the best that I can, unfiltered. I feel like a lot of the drive currently for innovation and research is heavily focused on surgical instrumentation, product-specific things, regenerative therapy, and not at all that I think that that's bad, but I think we have lost a little bit of the inquisitive curiosities about the function of the foot. And maybe it's because people feel like, oh, well, we figured it out. We don't have anything else to look at. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. And just, I think a really nice example of that is you had just talked about, you had kind of consulted with some orthopedic surgeons looking at progressive collapsing flat foot deformity. I would love to hear your kind of maybe 5-minute spiel on that, because that was one of the things that I was looking at in preparation for today. But I think there's so much about the function of the foot that we don't really have nailed down, but that's really not where people are focusing their time, energy, and attention. So in that thought process, what do you think would be the best route in terms of trying to inspire students or surgeons or non-surgeons, for that matter, in terms of where to start being curious or asking those questions? What are your thoughts on where we go from here?
Yeah, I think partly what you're touching on is funding, and it seems that all the funding is coming from instrumentation and biotechnologies, and there's not a lot of funding for kinematic research, and what research we do see in kinematics and kinetics is done in gait labs at major academic institutions, some of them at podiatry schools, but I think looking at unanswered questions is really where my research zeal came from. I've always been fascinated by hallux valgus, for example. It goes back to my Mert root days with the first ray function, and it became really important when suddenly everybody started doing these 3D bunion corrections and the premise of which was totally contrary to really what we understand about the first ray function, by the way. And it prompted me to eventually hook up with some folks at Kent State, because they had published some stuff with weight-bearing CT with hallux valgus patients. So I think, identifying unanswered questions and then working backward and deciding what research could be done to fill some of these voids. And all too often, these aren't expensive research projects. There's a lot of, quote, biomechanical research that can be done, clinically with patients without having to use a gate lab and without having to use expensive instrumentation, where you can answer some fundamental questions. I'll give you a great example. A study that I've been wanting to do, that Tim Dutra and I worked on trying to get done up at Samuel Merritt, is studying gait, or studying preventive interventions for patients who have had a transmetatarsal amputation. I mean, over 50% of patients who get a transmet amp end up with a higher amputation within 5 years. And it's always blamed on vascularity, and it really isn't. The fundamental reason why these poor patients re-ulcerate is they have a very altered gait pattern. They have very high shear forces going through the residual foot, and they can't help but break down due to mechanical forces. And there are ways to study that, and there's ways to prevent that, particularly with carbon fiber AFOs. So that's just one example. You look at a problem. Why are these patients re-ulcerating? Could it be a mechanical issue? And if it is, could we test an intervention, a very simple intervention, and see if it perhaps works?
Well said. I oftentimes, see podiatrists really putting lots of emphasis on the peripheral vascular status of a patient, which we can objectively ascertain and send to the appropriate referral, whether it's vascular surgery or interventionalist. But our job is dealing with the neuropathic patient with the foot deformity and their gait and their biomechanics, and how we're going to redistribute pressures so they can ambulate without further complication. I agree with you, Doug. I think that's where we need to be going, because the patients with the peripheral vascular issues, we're going to be sending them to the right place anyway.
And Joe, I might go back to just, I never found it difficult to find funding for research. It's amazing how many companies are out there would love to have testing or validation of their products done, but they've never known how to do it. And the few times I went to companies and said, hey, I'm a podiatrist, I have a faculty appointment at CCPM, we'd like to do a study testing the viability of your shoe to do XYZ, they just always would jump at it, because A, the research cost far less than what they ever thought it would cost, and B, nobody had ever approached them before.
That's actually a really good point. Again, the relationship stuff that Jeff and I have touched on with a couple other guests, and just building a community. And so I like that one. I might tuck that one away.
I'd love to, if we could just shift gears a little bit, I'd love to talk about your time and contributing nationally with the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine. I think it's fascinating how so many presidents come from California, and how much California has influenced the biomechanics. Can you share with us? I mean, like at the Western every year, there's such great talks, and there are luminaries in our profession, many times from the California area. Can you talk about biomechanics in California and how it's differentiated from biomechanics in other parts of the country?
Yeah, well, it's interesting how you kind of link those two together, because they very much were linked together, biomechanics and sports medicine. When I entered CCPM in 1977, the running boom had just started. Frank Shorter had just won his medal in the Olympics, and everybody was running, particularly in the Bay Area. And these celebrity podiatrists suddenly surfaced: Steve Subotnick, Harry Levac, and many others. And they were also happened to be teaching at the school. But their magic formula for runners was purely biomechanics. It wasn't surgery. And so we realized that if we wanted to be a running doctor or a sports doctor, we needed to know biomechanics. And so, we we went to outside lectures. We had a sports medicine club. We brought those guys in to give guest lectures. We used to visit their offices because most of my classmates, we wanted to be like them. And they founded the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine. It was really founded by Bob Barnes in Glendale. And by the way, Bob Barnes' young associate at that time was Frank Case, who went on and did great things for our profession. But Bob Barnes founded the academy, and the next year, John Pagliano was the president. And the year after that, Harry Levac, and the year after that, Steve Subotnick. So we had all these West Coast guys, but I don't think it was intended to keep the East Coast guys out. I mean, at the same time, Richard Schuster in New York and teaching at the New York School had a stable of world-class and Olympic runners that worshipped him as much as the West Coast runners worshipped Harry Levac and Steve Subotnick. So I always wanted to be president of the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine. I just thought, if I get a chance to do that, that's the pinnacle of my career. And I would have to say it was. Those were the best 7 years of my professional life. Not only the camaraderie, but by then the Academy really was involved in teaching and research. And I got to be part of that. And it just was a wonderful experience. And to this day, sports medicine is really incredibly dear to my heart, among many other aspects of podiatry.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah, I followed a couple of my friends. Jimmy Ratcliffe was recently the president from
Right.
Moscato, so we were classmates.
Oh, okay.
And we were all having a sports medicine vibe. Everyone's biking and running and swimming and trying to go to school, of course, and do well. So
Yeah.
that was kind of the vibe, and that kind of echoes what Kirby went through too when he was there, Dr. Kirby.
Absolutely.
That's great. Joe, your thoughts?
I'd love to kind of piggyback a little bit. One of the things that I truly appreciate too, just in terms of recent social media type posting, is your voice in the LinkedIn community as it comes back to surgical biomechanics. Specifically, there are a few surgeons that will like tag you and things to get your take, which I love it when there's so much mutual respect in our community to get someone else's opinion about something.
Yeah.
And not to totally put you on the spot, but in one of the big trends right now is around this MIS. And I don't know if this is part of what you guys are looking at or not in terms of some of your research. So you don't have to go down any, confidential information yet. But as the profession continues to evolve, surgically speaking, what do you think are trends that have legs that are going to stick around? And what do you think are things that are fads that maybe don't have the mechanics to support the claims?
I definitely think MIS is the way of the future. I'm surprised it took this long to take hold or people to really focus attention. I mean, we had MIS even back in the 80s, but it wasn't being done the proper way. It was just being done in the office as a way to avoid going to the hospital, but using really good surgical technology and fixation and sound biomechanical principles. It will supersede, I think, most open procedures. I applaud and totally embrace the concept that you can fully correct a hallux valgus deformity by moving the first metatarsal head back over the sesamoids. I mean, that is the critical thing. The rotational deformities that we see that have recently been, quote, discovered are all resolved by simply restoring the alignment of the head of the first metatarsal over the sesamoids. I mean, frontal plane sesamoid rotation, one-dimensional transverse plane relocation of the head of the first metatarsal. Now, the head of the first metatarsal pronated to the supportive is a relatively newish understanding there, in that very healthy patients without bunions have demonstrated with weight-bearing CT high levels of first metatarsal pronation, and they don't have a bunion. Number two, the severity of hallux valgus deformity as measured with HA angle and IM angle is not directly proportional to the degree of first metatarsal pronation. So they're not cause and effect in any way, but it's there, and it's being promoted in a big way by several surgical companies. And I think to the detriment of the patient. I mean, advocating that you need to fuse a joint to correct a bunion is ludicrous in my mind. I think there's a place for fusion of the first TMT joint, but the fact that you must rotate that joint in the frontal plane and fuse it in order to achieve an adequate correction is absolutely ludicrous. And I applaud the people who are promoting in a very ethical way a more simple and yet effective way to correct a hallux valgus deformity.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to watch the last few ACFAS meetings. There's been some really nice tracks on MIS. And if we look at the history of surgery in other fields, as soon as there starts to become an MIS option, I mean, it is the future of surgery. So the next thing in my mind then is to then walk it back and say, okay, well, does this make sense from a functional perspective? Are we able to achieve the same functional outcome, restoring mechanics? And again, from the things that, the group that has been really doing a wonderful job providing transparent, I say transparent evidence in terms of, hey, what we found that works really well, and hey, these are the outcomes and some of the problems that we've seen, and maybe these are ways to prevent them. I feel like they've done a really nice job of setting this stage. And I am of the Seattle mindset in terms of my training about stabilizing the first ray, but I don't think you have to fuse it necessarily. So again, this has been a really interesting paradigm for my own rational surgical biomechanic thought process, taking the stuff that we do know from an evidence perspective and applying it in this new way. And so I really appreciated your voice, because it isn't just, well, like, look at the radiographic correction or look at the surgery or a smaller incision or faster weight bearing time. It's very much rooted, no pun intended, in the mechanics of what have we restored and what did we maybe give up or trade. And I've appreciated that. So thank you for sharing that with our audience, because I don't know how many of the students are on LinkedIn, but I know I'm trying to get more of them as a option to get more information on what's trending right now.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing it up, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's, 90% of what I see presented in these surgical symposia are post-op x-rays. Mm-hmm. And there's no gait studies. There's no few times follow-up greater than 12 months. And really functional scoring of these patients in terms of lifestyle, quality of life, activities of daily living, and recurrence, which is important. But really, in the end, what have we achieved here? And like you said, what have we sacrificed to get there? And a lot of research needs to be done on hallux valgus, including, the pathomechanics. We really don't understand. We all agree hallux valgus is a multifactorial condition. There is no one single cause. And we need to look at patients and figure out, why does patient A have a bunion compared to patient B? Because I think there's a better surgical procedure for patient A than there is patient B. They're different etiologies.
I could talk his ear off about this all day, Jeff, but I'm going to throw the ball back to you in case you have other questions you'd like to go down.
No, that's all right. One of the questions we always ask our guests, Doug, is their mentors and who really shaped their professional life. And I think you've mentioned a couple people, but I was going to say, I loved your root analogy there, statement, Joe. When you wrote your first paper, John Weed and Merton Root were co-authors with you. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, what a great experience. And the one thing I got from both those men, they had the highest level of academic integrity that I've ever seen. And I've been around some top academics in my 40 years, and they were as good or better than anybody. They, when we designed that study and when we collected the data and we wrote the data, they were just so devoted to truth and integrity and report what we found. Don't slant the truth, do it right. And if it doesn't come out the way you want, you're obligated to share that. And they both left, especially John. Mert wasn't teaching at the school then, but John Weed introduced me to him. But John Weed was just such a wonderful human being, great teacher and communicator, and he happened to be a very good surgeon. I actually went and watched him do surgery, and he was the first biomechanical surgeon I ever saw. I mean, he was looking at midfoot osteotomies to correct forefoot varus, forefoot valgus. He was looking at ways to do tendon balancing to stabilize the first ray, and he was very much into post-operative evaluation of patients walking and doing the stuff that we still don't do enough of today. So yeah, they were strong influences on me. And John Pagliano his office was in Long Beach. I grew up in Long Beach. He was the first podiatrist I visited. Someone said, you need to go visit John Pagliano. And I went in the waiting room and I sat down, and Tommy John was in the waiting room. He's waiting to, see, and he was pitching for the Dodgers then. And I look across, I think, oh my God, that's Tommy John. Wow. And they bring Tommy John back and put him in a waiting room. And then Pagliano comes out and meets me. He says, okay, you want to see some patients? And I said, sure. We go in the room and there's Tommy John. And John's talking to him and about his problem and this and that. And I was just, I was not only starstruck, I was just, I couldn't even talk. But seeing John implement sports medicine and biomechanics in his practice with very little surgery. He did some forefoot surgery, but he made a very healthy living and had a wonderful practice, just doing practical applied biomechanics. And that had a big influence on me. And then, of course, I had so many colleagues, through the Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine, and who, we all fed off each other, which was great. I mean, that's what you do at this point in your career. You seek out colleagues who have similar interest, and you kind of challenge each other, and you kind of raise the bar, and that's how we all get better.
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to talk with you about is you've done some research over the years in the student recruitment realm, looking to enhance our applicant pool and bring high quality students into podiatric medicine. You want to chat about that for a little bit, because that's near and dear to our hearts at the college right now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm very concerned about the trend. I mean, I think things are being done in the right way. I hate to sound like a dinosaur, because, I look back when I applied to podiatry school, and I applied for all the reasons that I think people should still apply today. And that is, it looked like a profession where you could make immediate impact on people's lives in a positive way. And I looked at the lifestyle. I realized I was working as an orderly in a very large hospital here in Long Beach, a level 1 trauma center. I worked in the OR, and I was a pre-med student, and I worked the night shift while I was in college. And I saw these poor trauma surgeons come in, and even orthopedic surgeons, working until 1 in the morning. And then, I knew they went back to the office at 7 in the morning. And I was looking at that lifestyle thinking, I don't know if that's really what I want to do. And then I visited John Pagliano, and I was like, boy, that looks like a much better, everything looks better. And indeed, when I opened up my office and attracted students, prospective students who would come and visit me, I would tell them, I said, this is everything I thought it was going to be and more. I mean, it's even better than I thought, and I knew it was a great profession and great professional opportunity. And podiatry offered me a chance to do everything I ever wanted to do surgically, everything I wanted to do sports medicine, and certainly everything I wanted to do in terms of research and entrepreneurship. So I was never held back by my DPM degree. In fact, many times my DPM degree got me more than what I think an MD degree would have gotten. Because there was a mystery around it. It was sort of like, this guy knows everything there is about the foot, I want to kind of get to know this guy and really understand how much he does know. It was sort of like that. But I will say that when I went to CCPM, Jeff, I was a transition class. It was a 3-year curriculum, year round, up till 1977. The students went to school through the summer and they hated it. So they transitioned back to a 4-year curriculum my year. And my tuition for the 4 years total was $18,000
It's different.
total.
Different world.
And
Yeah.
I think when I got out of school, a pair of foot orthotics, let's say you did a pair of foot orthotics for a patient, it was about the same as it is today. It was, although some people do more, but everybody quotes $400. It wasn't unusual to charge $400 for a pair of foot orthotics. You got paid $1,000 for a bunionectomy in 1980. So your return on investment was very rapid, very gratifying. And sadly, I think that is the number one obstacle today, is this meteoric rise in tuition for all medical schools. I recognize that. But the perceived dwindling reimbursement. Now, I would argue against that, because the dwindling reimbursement is primarily for surgery. And there's been no dwindling reimbursement for non-surgical intervention. The Richie brace, for example, gets increased in reimbursement 6% every year. From the year I introduced the Richie brace 30 years ago to today, the reimbursement for it has increased over $130. There's no surgical procedure that has increased in reimbursement $130 in the last 30 years. But I'm by no means using the Richie brace to say that's the only way to go. It's just all non-surgical treatments seem to be reimbursed on an increased level compared to surgery. And I really think podiatry schools should position themselves as training students to be comprehensive foot and ankle specialists, where surgery certainly can be emphasized as an option postgraduate. But a general podiatrist, which I truly was, can make a very healthy and very, very satisfying living today in today's community and today's marketplace. And I think in some ways we've lost sight of that at multiple levels in the training.
You're hitting on one of my pet peeves right now, because I can't believe the prevalence of podiatrists that are just giving away prefab orthotics for $100 or something. My philosophy was always, if they want to get a prefab, go to the store and get it. If you want expert care, come to the office. We'll get you a functional device that works the way it should.
Right.
I think that's part and parcel, Joe, to your comment that we're not putting enough emphasis on biomechanics and the importance of its ability to make a difference in a patient's ability to ambulate, run, do activities of daily life if necessary. I think it's a big challenge for us right now.
And I think there are a couple levels to that too, because I think the other thing that is not necessarily unique now as compared to maybe 30 years ago, but definitely a difference, is the cost sharing now that patients carry in terms of their insurance premiums, and then what they're having to pay out of pocket for things. And so, and this kind of, not to take up all the time, I'll try to be very brief in this, but if we are going to try to advocate that a custom molded orthotic is superior to an over-the-counter device, I think we need to identify a couple of key points there. One being, if that's true, is it true for everyone? If it's not everyone, like what specific conditions? I mean, we all know intrinsically as foot and ankle surgeons and biomechanics that there are certain conditions that are going to do better with a customized product, period, right? There's no question about that. However, we can't really prove that all the time in a way to take it then to an insurance company and say, look, we have the evidence to support that this is the better product. You need to help cover this for your patients. And so to ask a patient to shell out $400 when their insurance won't cover it, but their insurance will cover a surgery, whether that's a declining reimbursement or not, they'll cover the surgery. All the patient is looking at is a price tag. Now, that's not every patient, but it is something that now it takes up some of that conversation, right? So this is really, in my opinion, where we need a lot more focused research in terms of very specific, maybe diagnoses or conditions to really help advocate for why a custom product is necessary, or maybe why it's not. Again, maybe what we think that we know that, oh, that everyone needs a custom orthotic, maybe they actually don't. And so if they don't,
Yeah.
then who really does? So that, again, we can focus that treatment in the way that is appropriate with good integrity to our insurance companies who we're providing the care for their patients, but then also to our patients to give them the services that they deserve when they're paying these insurance premiums.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here, because I was a scientific chair of the PAFOLA meeting, which we did every year, trying to scientifically validate the worth of custom foot orthotics. And it became apparent to me that all of the studies we were doing were in the lab. They were kinematic studies showing that we reduced velocity of pronation by 10 degrees. And I thought, insurance companies aren't impressed by this. And to this day, I've yet to see a foot orthotic outcome study that focused on quality of life and return to activity, return to work, showing an economic benefit of foot orthotics. We have some really good studies done in Australia on heel pain, showing significant effects on not only quality of life, but overall health, activity, and work and productivity. And what hasn't been done is to show how foot orthotics will expedite the return of a patient to fitness, to the workplace, and have secondary health benefits that are measurable. That's the kind of research we need to do, not that we reduce pronation better than a over-the-counter power step device.
Right.
So, but I also want to bring out one other thing that's a parallel to this, and that is biomechanics is not foot orthotic therapy. Foot orthotic therapy is certainly an arm of the application of biomechanics, but I think too often in our profession, we automatically assume biomechanics is foot orthotic therapy. And CPME with new regulations and biomechanics with residency training, they fail to recognize that biomechanics is the fundamental understanding of selection of surgical procedures. And I asked them to change the rotation or the discipline to pathomechanics. And when I wrote my book was going to be a book on biomechanics. And I said, something, I want to make this more practical. And really, in my practice, applying biomechanics was really changing it to applied pathomechanics. And I think no matter what kind of practice you have to be able to evaluate a patient who comes in as a chief complaint with a musculoskeletal condition. And the first thing you have to figure out is why they got it. How did it get there? And from that, you pick the appropriate treatment directed at the underlying mechanism of the disease or the deformity. And we don't teach that way. And we need to teach that way. And we need to practice that way. And I practice that way. Mechanics practice, it didn't mean that I put every patient who came in, I didn't put them in a foot orthosis.
Yeah.
But if I had they might have ligament laxity from a ruptured ATFL, but a lot of times they had functional instability due to a significant balance disorder and proprioceptive feedback, where the treatment is totally different,
Yeah.
So I would like to see our profession recognize applied biomechanics in a different way than.
Yeah, oh man, I just got, again,
I
we're
know
coming.
we went on a tangent there, and Doug, we'll have to talk about student recruitment a little bit better.
I just wanted to, sorry, I think there's a little bit of a delay.
Yep, you froze for a second there, Joe.
I just got super excited when he said the words pathomechanics, because Jeff, that's like my personal interest area. And I couldn't agree more, Doug. So this was actually something that my passion for biomechanics very much comes from some of the mentors that I've had in my career. And I'm so grateful that in my residency training, the conversations that I had specifically was with Dr. Ford, where he would get so frustrated as our residency director that they would come down on him about, oh, you don't have enough biomechanics numbers. He's like, everything we do all day long is biomechanics. How can they come back and say that? And so for all of our pre-op H&Ps, he was just like, just start documenting your absolute full H&P for biomechanics. So we started doing that, and that was enough to support. Because again, all of the decision-making in your surgical planning was all biomechanics. Like, it wasn't just because we didn't create a foot orthotic for that patient, doesn't mean we weren't treating them biomechanically. And again, as I've talked with students now for so many years, that's kind of become also my little bit of a pet peeve, is like students will say things like, oh, I don't want to do biomechanics, I want to be a surgeon. And like my hackles go up in the back of my neck, right? Because it's like everything you're going to do is biomechanics. You have to understand the foundational function of how the foot works, or you're not going to be effective in whatever you choose to do. So I appreciate you bringing up pathomechanics.
My pleasure.
Well, Doug, we'll circle around and talk more about student recruitment another time, but on behalf, Joe and I would love to thank you for joining us on Dean's Chat. What a phenomenal discussion this past hour. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. I really respect both of you for what you've done and continue to do. And I appreciate you reaching out to me so we could share our ideas together.
Oh, that's great. And we'll also put in the show notes where people can reach you and websites and stuff like that. So I'll reach out to you about that.
Happy to do that.
All right. There's the cup. We're going to send you a Dean Chat cup. We don't know what your drink of choice is, but it will accommodate it.
Okay, that'll be fine.
All right. Well, to all of our listeners out there, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I always ask for a 5-star rating. But Joe and I were talking recently, and we thought maybe we'd ask for some comments on Spotify and Apple. So if you have time to put some comments on, we'd love it. If you're watching on YouTube, we'd love for you to become a subscriber. And until next week, cheers, everybody.